In the crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves danced through Westminster's ancient grounds, Queen Consort Catherine stood before the cenotaph with tears glistening in her eyes. The weight of a nation's grief rested upon her shoulders as she prepared to honor those who had given everything for freedom. Behind her, thousands of veterans, families, and dignitaries waited in solemn silence. Today was different from previous ceremonies. This year marked the centenary of the unknown warrior's burial, and Catherine would become the first queen consort in modern history to personally light the eternal flame that would burn for 7 days and nights in memory of the fallen. As she lifted the ceremonial torch, her hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from the profound emotional weight of representing millions of mothers, wives, and daughters who had lost their beloved sons, husbands, and fathers in service to their country. The flame would symbolize more than remembrance. It would represent hope, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between those who serve and those who remember them. This is the story of how one ceremony transformed from a routine royal duty into a deeply personal journey of healing, remembrance, and national unity that would touch hearts across the globe. 3 weeks before the ceremony, Queen Consort Catherine sat in her private study at Clarence House, surrounded by historical documents and photographs that would change her understanding of sacrifice forever. The autumn sunlight filtered through tall windows as she carefully examined black and white images from the Great War, each face telling a story of courage and loss that transcended time itself. Her private secretary, Margaret Thornfield, had arranged these materials as part of Catherine's preparation for what many considered the most significant remembrance ceremony in recent history. The centenary of the unknown warrior's burial demanded more than the usual royal protocols. It required a deep, personal understanding of what this moment meant to families across Britain and the Commonwealth. Catherine picked up a letter dated November 1920, written by a mother whose son had fallen at the Somme. The handwriting was delicate but firm, each word carrying the weight of inconsolable grief mixed with fierce pride. "My dear boy gave his life so that others might live in freedom," the letter read. "Though my heart breaks daily, I know he rests with honor among heroes." Catherine felt tears forming as she read these intimate words from a century past, realizing that this woman's pain was shared by millions of mothers across generations. The queen consort had always taken her ceremonial duties seriously, but this preparation was different. King Charles had specifically requested that she take the lead role in this commemoration, believing that her genuine empathy and personal connection to military families made her uniquely suited for such an important moment. Catherine's own grandfather had served in World War II, and she had grown up hearing stories of his bravery and the toll war had taken on their family. As she delved deeper into the historical records, Catherine discovered that the tradition of the unknown warrior had begun with a simple yet profound idea from a British chaplain who had seen a grave marked only with the words, "An unknown British soldier." This anonymous grave had inspired him to propose that one unidentified soldier be brought home and buried with the highest honors, representing all those whose bodies had never been recovered or identified. The preparation process involved meetings with historians, veterans organizations, and Gold Star families who had lost loved ones in recent conflicts. Each conversation added layers to Catherine's understanding of modern sacrifice. She met with Sarah Mitchell, a young widow whose husband had died in Afghanistan, leaving behind twin daughters who barely remembered their father. Sarah spoke of the ongoing struggle to explain their father's absence while maintaining pride in his service. Catherine also spent time with James Morrison, an elderly veteran of the Falklands War, who had struggled with survivor's guilt for decades. His weathered hands shook slightly as he described losing his best friend in combat, and how ceremonies like these helped him process emotions he had carried for 40 years. These personal encounters transformed Catherine's approach from dutiful obligation to heartfelt mission. The logistics of the ceremony required months of planning. Security arrangements, media coordination, and diplomatic protocols all needed careful attention. Representatives from 14 Commonwealth nations would attend, each bringing their own traditions of remembrance. Catherine insisted on personally reviewing every detail, from the specific wording of prayers to the placement of ceremonial wreaths. During one particularly moving preparation session, Catherine visited the Royal British Legion's headquarters to meet with families of recently fallen soldiers. She spent hours listening to their stories, learning about their loved ones' personalities, dreams, and the circumstances of their deaths. One mother, Elizabeth Harper, spoke about her son Michael, who had been killed by a roadside bomb in Iraq. She described how Michael had always wanted to be a teacher, but felt called to serve his country first. His plans to return to university and work with special needs children would never be fulfilled, but his sacrifice ensured others could pursue their dreams safely. These conversations profoundly impacted Catherine's preparation. She realized that the ceremony needed to honor not just the unknown soldier for 1920, but all the unknown stories of sacrifice that continued in modern conflicts. She worked with speechwriters to craft remarks that would acknowledge both historical sacrifice and contemporary loss, bridging the gap between past and present grief. The Queen Consort also spent considerable time studying the ceremonial aspects of remembrance. She learned about the significance of the 2-minute silence, first observed on November 11, 1919, and how different cultures within the Commonwealth expressed their respect for fallen soldiers. The Maori haka performed by New Zealand forces, the last post played by Scottish pipers, and the haunting Aboriginal didgeridoo ceremonies from Australia all contributed to a rich tapestry of remembrance traditions. Catherine's preparation included physical and emotional readiness. She practiced the ceremonial movements repeatedly, ensuring that her participation would flow seamlessly with the ancient traditions while adding her personal touch of genuine emotion. She worked with royal protocol officers to understand the precise timing of each element, from the laying of wreaths to the lighting of the eternal flame. The personal cost of this preparation was significant. Catherine found herself deeply affected by the stories she heard and the historical accounts she studied. Sleep became difficult as images of war's toll filled her thoughts. She sought guidance from military chaplains who had experience helping people process grief and trauma, learning techniques for maintaining emotional stability while honoring the depth of loss these ceremonies represented. Her husband, Prince William, provided crucial support during this intense preparation period. He understood the weight of royal duty and helped Catherine process the emotional aspects of her upcoming role. Together, they visited military hospitals where wounded veterans were recovering, gaining additional perspective on the ongoing cost of service and sacrifice. As the ceremony date approached, Catherine felt the responsibility intensifying. Media interest was unprecedented, with international coverage planned from dozens of countries. The ceremony would be watched by millions, but she knew the most important audience would be the families of the fallen, both those present and those watching from around the world. The final week of preparation involved dress rehearsals at Westminster Abbey, where every detail was practiced until perfect. Catherine walked through her movements repeatedly, practicing the solemn pace required for such occasions while maintaining the dignity and grace expected of her position. The weight of the ceremonial torch was heavier than expected, requiring adjustments to her stance and movement. During the final preparation meeting, Catherine met with representatives from military charities who would benefit from increased awareness generated by the ceremony. She learned about ongoing support programs for veterans and military families, understanding how this moment of remembrance connected to practical assistance for those dealing with the ongoing effects of military service. The emotional preparation reached its peak when Catherine spent a private moment in the chapel at Windsor Castle, where she reflected on the magnitude of what she was about to undertake. Surrounded by centuries of royal history and the tombs of monarchs who had led Britain through numerous conflicts, she felt the weight of tradition and the responsibility to honor it properly. Her final preparation involved a personal letter-writing session, where Catherine composed private messages to several Gold Star families who would attend the ceremony. These handwritten notes expressed her personal commitment to honoring their loved one's memory and her recognition of their ongoing sacrifice. The act of writing these letters helped crystallize her intentions for the ceremony and strengthened her resolve to make the event meaningful for those who needed it most. As the evening before the ceremony arrived, Catherine reviewed her notes one final time. The speeches were memorized, the movements rehearsed, and the emotional preparation as complete as possible. However, she knew that the true test would come in the moment itself, when faced with the reality of representing a nation's grief and gratitude before the watching world. The morning of the ceremony dawned gray and misty, as if nature itself recognized the solemnity of the day ahead. Queen Consort Catherine awoke before her alarm at 5:30 a.m., having spent a restless night filled with dreams of marching soldiers and grieving families. The weight of responsibility had settled over her like a heavy cloak, but with it came a profound sense of purpose that steadied her nerves and focused her mind. As she prepared for the day, Catherine's personal dresser, Maria Santos, helped her into the carefully chosen outfit that had been planned months in advance. The deep navy coat dress was elegant yet understated, adorned with a diamond brooch that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II and worn during similar ceremonies. The choice of accessories had been deliberate. Each piece carried historical significance and connected her to the long tradition of royal remembrance. The poppy pinned to her lapel was not the standard plastic version sold by the Royal British Legion, but a unique creation made by the wives of serving soldiers, each red petal hand-stitched and representing a different regiment. Catherine had specifically requested this personal touch, wanting to carry with her the literal handiwork of military families who understood sacrifice intimately. Her makeup was applied with careful attention to the day's emotional demands. The makeup artist, Helena Wright, had worked with Catherine for several years and understood the delicate balance required for ceremonial events. The look needed to be respectful and dignified while being resilient enough to withstand potential tears without appearing unprofessional. Helena used waterproof mascara and carefully blended foundation that would photograph well under the harsh lights of television cameras. During her preparation, Catherine received updates from her private secretary about the logistical elements falling into place across London. Westminster had been closed to normal traffic since midnight, with security barriers creating a protective corridor for the ceremonial procession. Thousands of police officers were positioned throughout central London, working alongside military personnel to ensure the safety of the massive crowd expected to attend. The guest list for the ceremony read like a roster of international dignitaries and military leadership. Prime ministers from across the Commonwealth had arrived in London, along with ambassadors from allied nations and representatives from NATO countries. However, Catherine knew the most important attendees would be the ordinary people, veterans, military families, and citizens who came to pay their respects to those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. As Catherine prepared to leave Clarence House, she paused to read through messages that had arrived overnight from around the world. Letters from military families, emails from veteran organizations, and social media messages from people sharing their own stories of loss and remembrance. One message particularly moved her, from a young girl in Canada whose father had died serving in Afghanistan. The 8-year-old had drawn a picture of her daddy in uniform, standing next to an angel with the words, "Thank you for remembering my hero," written in careful childish handwriting. The drive from Clarence House to Westminster provided Catherine with a final opportunity to center herself emotionally and mentally. As her official car moved through the empty streets of London, she could see people already gathering along the route despite the early hour. Many carried photographs of relatives who had died in military service, turning the journey into an impromptu memorial parade that began long before the official ceremony. Elderly veterans, some in wheelchairs pushed by younger family members, positioned themselves along the barriers with military precision despite their advanced age. Catherine noticed one particularly elderly man, probably in his late 90s, wearing medals from World War II and holding a photograph of what appeared to be his fallen comrades. The sight reinforced her understanding that this ceremony represented a living connection between past and present sacrifice. Upon arriving at Westminster, Catherine was briefed by the ceremony's chief organizer, Colonel Patricia Edwards, a decorated military officer who had overseen numerous state occasions. The final run-through of timing and positioning took place in a secure area behind Westminster Abbey, where Catherine practiced her movements one last time while surrounded by the organized chaos of a major state event. The international delegations were arriving according to a carefully orchestrated schedule, each with their own security details and protocol requirements. Catherine took time to greet several of the visiting dignitaries personally, including the Prime Minister of New Zealand, whose country had contributed significantly to both world wars, and the President of Poland, representing a nation that had suffered tremendously during World War II. The most meaningful greeting came when Catherine met privately with a delegation of Gold Star families who had traveled from across Britain and the Commonwealth to attend the ceremony. This group included Sarah Mitchell, whom Catherine had met during her preparation, along with 15 other families who had lost loved ones in recent conflicts. The meeting took place in a quiet chapel adjacent to Westminster Abbey, away from media attention and public scrutiny. Each family member was given the opportunity to share briefly about their loved one, creating a profound moment of connection that transcended formal protocol. Catherine listened intently as Jennifer Walsh spoke about her brother Kevin, who had died in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and how ceremonies like this helped keep his memory alive for his children who had never met their uncle. The personal nature of these stories reinforced Catherine's commitment to making the ceremony meaningful rather than merely ceremonial. As the morning progressed, the crowd outside Westminster continued to grow exponentially. Police estimated that over 50,000 people had gathered, creating one of the largest remembrance gatherings in London's history. The crowd was remarkably diverse, spanning all ages and representing many different communities within British society. Veterans from conflicts dating back to the 1950s stood alongside young military personnel currently serving in various deployments around the world. Catherine could hear the murmur of the crowd through the thick walls of Westminster Abbey as she completed her final preparations. The sound was both humbling and inspiring. Thousands of people had chosen to spend their day honoring military sacrifice, demonstrating the enduring power of remembrance traditions in contemporary society. The weather outside remained overcast, with intermittent light drizzle that seemed appropriate for the solemn occasion. Umbrella vendors appeared on surrounding streets, but many attendees chose to stand in the rain uncovered, viewing the discomfort as a small sacrifice compared to what they were commemorating. Media preparations reached their final stages as television crews from around the world positioned themselves to capture every moment of the ceremony. The BBC had assembled its most experienced ceremonial coverage team, while international networks prepared to broadcast live to millions of viewers across the globe. However, strict protocols ensured that media presence would not intrude upon the solemnity of the occasion. Catherine received a final briefing about security arrangements, which included discreet protection for her throughout the ceremony, while maintaining the open, accessible nature that remembrance events required. The balance between safety and public access had required months of planning, with security services working to ensure that legitimate attendees could participate fully while preventing any potential threats. The musical elements of the ceremony were rehearsed one final time by military bands from various regiments. The haunting sound of bagpipes echoed through Westminster's corridors as Scottish regiments prepared their contributions, while brass bands tuned instruments that would accompany the ceremonial elements. The choir from Westminster Abbey ran through their pieces, including specially commissioned works that would premiere during the ceremony. Religious leaders from multiple faiths prepared to participate in the interfaith elements of the ceremony, reflecting the diverse nature of modern British society and the various religious backgrounds of those who had served in the military. The Archbishop of Canterbury would lead the primary service, but representatives from Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, and Sikh communities would also contribute prayers and readings. As the ceremony's start time approached, Catherine took a few moments of private reflection in a small chamber within Westminster Abbey. Surrounded by centuries of history and the tombs of monarchs who had faced their own moments of national crisis, she felt connected to the long tradition of leadership during difficult times. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the honor of representing the nation's gratitude to those who had given their lives in service. Her final preparation included a brief conversation with King Charles, who offered words of encouragement and reminded her that the most important aspect of the ceremony would be the genuine emotion and respect she brought to the role. The technical elements were important, but the heart of the ceremony lay in authentic recognition of sacrifice and loss. The sound of military drums began to echo through Westminster as ceremonial units took their positions outside the abbey. The formal procession was about to begin, and with it, Catherine would step into one of the most significant public roles of her life as Queen Consort. The morning's preparation had brought her to this moment, but the ceremony itself would test her ability to channel personal emotion into public service in honor of those who would never see another morning. The great doors of Westminster Abbey swung open with ceremonial precision at exactly 11 a.m., releasing the sound of massed military bands into the crisp London air. Queen Consort Catherine emerged into the gray morning light, her posture erect and purposeful as she took her first steps into what would become one of the most emotionally powerful ceremonies in recent royal history. The sight that greeted her was breathtaking in its scope and solemnity. Stretching as far as she could see, thousands upon thousands of people stood in absolute silence, their faces upturned toward the cenotaph, where she would soon perform the ceremony's most sacred moments. Veterans in their dress uniforms, their chests adorned with medals earned through decades of service, stood alongside young military personnel whose own service was just beginning. Families clutched photographs of lost loved ones, while children held small paper poppies they had made in school. Catherine's first official act was to inspect the honor guard, a tradition that connected her to centuries of royal protocol, while acknowledging the contemporary military's continuing service. As she moved slowly along the line of perfectly uniformed soldiers, each representing different branches of the armed forces, she could see in their faces the same dedication and commitment that had driven their predecessors to make the ultimate sacrifice. The young guardsman at the end of the line caught her attention particularly. He could not have been more than 19 years old, his face serious beyond his years as he maintained perfect military bearing. Catherine realized that he was probably the same age as many of the soldiers who had died in the trenches of World War I, boys who had become men in the crucible of war and never had the chance to grow old. The weight of that realization settled heavily upon her as she completed the inspection. The formal procession to the cenotaph began with the sound of military drums, marking a slow, measured pace that had been used in military ceremonies for generations. Catherine walked behind the Archbishop of Canterbury and, ahead of the international delegation, her position in the procession carefully chosen to demonstrate both respect for religious authority and the importance of her role as the ceremony's focal point. As they moved through the crowd, Catherine could hear whispered conversations and see the emotional impact of the moment on those who had gathered to witness it. An elderly woman near the front of the crowd was quietly weeping while clutching a faded photograph of a young man in World War II uniform. A veteran in a wheelchair, pushed by what appeared to be his grandson, sat with tears streaming down his weathered face. These personal moments of grief and remembrance played out across the entire gathering, creating a powerful collective expression of loss and honor. The cenotaph itself stood starkly beautiful against the gray sky, its simple design somehow more powerful than any elaborate monument could have been. The words, "The Glorious Dead," carved into its stone face seemed to shimmer in the morning light, while fresh wreaths from overnight vigils surrounded its base. Catherine had studied the monument's history during her preparation, learning how its austere design had been deliberately chosen to represent all faiths and backgrounds of those who had died in service. When Catherine reached her designated position, she paused for a moment to survey the scene around her. Television cameras captured her expression of profound solemnity mixed with deep emotion, an image that would be broadcast around the world and remembered for years to come. The silence was so complete that the only sounds were the distant rumble of London traffic and the occasional call of birds overhead. The first formal element of the ceremony was the reading of selected names from the Book of Remembrance, a tradition that personalized the vast numbers of military dead by focusing on individual stories of sacrifice. Catherine had specifically requested that the names include casualties from recent conflicts as well as historical ones, bridging the gap between past and present loss. As each name was read, accompanied by brief details of the person's service and death, Catherine felt the weight of individual stories that represented millions of similar sacrifices. Private James Mitchell, aged 20, died at the Somme, July 1916, leaving behind a wife and infant son. Corporal Sarah Williams, aged 24, killed by improvised explosive device in Afghanistan, 2010, posthumously awarded the Military Cross for valor. Each name represented not just a life lost, but families shattered and futures that would never be realized. The moment for laying the ceremonial wreath arrived with the sound of a single trumpet playing the last post, its haunting melody carrying across the thousands of gathered mourners and reaching far beyond Westminster to listeners around the world. Catherine approached the cenotaph carrying a massive wreath of red poppies, each flower representing countless individuals who had made the ultimate sacrifice. As she bent to place the wreath at the base of the monument, Catherine was overwhelmed by the proximity to so much history and sacrifice. The stone was worn smooth by weather and time, but also by the millions of hands that had touched it over the decades, each touch representing a personal connection to military loss. She could feel the weight of collective grief pressing down upon her, but also the strength that came from shared remembrance and mutual support. The 2-minute silence that followed was unlike anything Catherine had ever experienced. In a city of millions with thousands of people gathered in one place, the absolute quiet was profound and moving. During those 2 minutes, she thought about every story she had heard during her preparation, every family she had met, every photograph she had studied of young men and women who had died far from home in service to their country. The silence was broken by the sound of military jets flying overhead in formation, their engines roaring in tribute to fallen comrades. As Catherine looked up to watch them pass, she noticed that one position in the formation was empty. The missing man formation that honored those who would never return from combat. The symbolism was powerful and immediate, bringing tears to her eyes that she did not attempt to hide. The international elements of the ceremony began with representatives from Commonwealth nations approaching the cenotaph to lay their own wreaths. Catherine watched as each delegation brought their unique traditions of remembrance while participating in the shared ceremony. The Canadian delegation included Indigenous veterans whose contributions to military service had been historically overlooked. The Australian group was led by a woman whose great-grandfather had died at Gallipoli and whose son had recently completed service in Iraq. One of the most moving moments came when the New Zealand delegation performed a traditional Maori haka in honor of their fallen warriors. The powerful, rhythmic chanting and movements created an atmosphere of fierce pride mixed with profound grief, adding a cultural dimension to remembrance that resonated with everyone present regardless of their background. Catherine later described this moment as transformative in her understanding of how different cultures process military loss while sharing common emotions. The ceremony's central moment arrived as Catherine approached the eternal flame that would burn for 7 days and nights in memory of the fallen. The specially designed torch had been lit from flames burning at war graves around the world, symbolically connecting this moment to every place where soldiers had been laid to rest. As Catherine lifted the torch, she felt the weight of representing not just Britain, but all nations that had lost citizens to war. The lighting of the eternal flame required steady hands and careful attention to the ceremonial protocols that had been practiced repeatedly during preparation. However, in the moment itself, Catherine found that her movements flowed naturally from deep emotional connection rather than mere technical precision. As the flame caught and began to burn steadily, a collective sigh seemed to rise from the gathered crowd, as if thousands of people had been holding their breath, waiting for this symbolic moment. The flame's light seemed to grow brighter as the gray morning continued, creating a beacon that could be seen from significant distances across central London. Catherine remained standing beside the flame for several minutes, using the time to reflect on the magnitude of what had just occurred and to center herself for the ceremony's continuation. The religious elements of the service brought together multiple faith traditions in recognition of the diverse backgrounds of those who had served and died. The Archbishop of Canterbury delivered a prayer that emphasized themes of sacrifice, service, and eternal rest, while representatives from other faiths offered their own traditions of honoring the dead. Catherine found these interfaith elements particularly meaningful, as they acknowledged the complex nature of modern British society and military service. The final formal element of the ceremony was Catherine's brief address to the gathered crowd and television audiences around the world. Her words had been carefully prepared, but she delivered them with obvious emotion that transformed formal remarks into a personal expression of gratitude and grief. Her voice caught slightly as she spoke about the ongoing cost of freedom and the debt owed to those who had paid the ultimate price for the safety and security that others took for granted. As the ceremony concluded with the national anthem, Catherine remained at attention beside the eternal flame, which would continue burning long after the crowds dispersed and the dignitaries returned to their regular duties. The flame represented the enduring nature of remembrance and the ongoing commitment to honor those who had given their lives in service to others. The ceremony had ended, but its impact would continue to resonate in the hearts and minds of all who had witnessed this powerful demonstration of national gratitude and collective grief. The immediate aftermath of the ceremony unfolded like a carefully choreographed ballet of emotion and protocol. As the final notes of the national anthem faded into the London morning, Queen Consort Catherine remained standing beside the eternal flame for several additional moments, seemingly reluctant to break the sacred connection that had been established during the service. The thousands of gathered mourners and observers maintained their respectful silence, creating an extended moment of collective reflection that spoke to the ceremony's profound impact. When Catherine finally began to move away from the cenotaph, the carefully planned receiving line commenced with representatives from military families, veteran organizations, and international delegations. However, what had been conceived as a formal protocol quickly transformed into something far more personal and emotionally powerful as Catherine encountered individuals whose lives had been forever changed by military service and sacrifice. The first person in the receiving line was Margaret Thompson, an 87-year-old widow whose husband had died in Korea in 1951. Margaret had attended remembrance ceremonies for over 70 years, but had never had the opportunity to speak directly with a member of the royal family about her loss. When Catherine took her hands and asked about her husband, Margaret began to cry openly, describing how Henry had been killed just 3 weeks before the armistice was signed, leaving her with 2 young children and a lifetime of wondering what their life together might have been. Catherine's response surprised protocol officers and demonstrated the emotional authenticity that had characterized her entire preparation for the ceremony. Rather than offering the standard expressions of sympathy and gratitude, she asked Margaret specific questions about Henry's personality, his dreams, and how his children had grown up without knowing their father. The conversation extended far longer than scheduled, but created a moment of genuine human connection that resonated throughout the remaining interactions. Each conversation in the receiving line brought new stories of loss, sacrifice, and enduring love that transcended the formal boundaries of a state ceremony. Catherine met James Patterson, whose son David had been killed in Afghanistan in 2009 while trying to rescue wounded comrades under heavy fire. James carried with him a letter that David had written to be delivered to his parents if he died in combat, expressing his love for them and his belief that his service had meaning despite its ultimate cost. The international delegations brought their own perspectives on military sacrifice and remembrance traditions. The French representative shared stories about the ongoing discovery of World War I remains in Flanders fields, where farmers still regularly uncover the bodies of soldiers who had been missing for over a century. The Canadian delegation spoke about Indigenous veterans whose contributions have been historically overlooked and how contemporary ceremonies were working to acknowledge their sacrifice more fully. One particularly moving encounter involved Catherine meeting with Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a military surgeon who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan before being wounded by a suicide bomber in 2011. Dr. Morrison had lost both legs in the attack, but had continued her medical career, specializing in treating other wounded veterans. Her perspective on sacrifice was unique. She had both witnessed the loss of others and experienced her own life-altering injury in service to her country. Dr. Morrison explained to Catherine how ceremonies like this one provided crucial psychological support for veterans dealing with survivor's guilt and post-traumatic stress disorder. The public acknowledgement of military sacrifice helped validate the experiences of those who had returned home forever changed by their service. She described how many veterans struggled with feeling forgotten or misunderstood by civilian society, making public remembrance events essential for their ongoing mental health and social integration. The media coverage of the ceremony had been unprecedented in its scope and emotional impact. Television audiences around the world had witnessed Catherine's obvious emotion during the service, particularly during the lighting of the eternal flame and her brief address to the crowd. Social media platforms were flooded with images and video clips from the ceremony, along with personal stories from viewers who had been moved to share their own family histories of military service and sacrifice. News organizations reported that the ceremony had been watched by an estimated 150 million people worldwide, making it one of the most viewed royal events in recent history. However, the coverage focused not on the spectacle or pageantry typical of royal occasions, but on the genuine emotion and authentic human connections that had characterized the entire event. International commentators noted how Catherine had transformed what could have been a routine ceremonial duty into a profound expression of national gratitude and collective grief. The immediate impact of the ceremony extended far beyond those who had attended in person. Veteran organizations across Britain reported significant increases in calls to support helplines, as the ceremony had prompted many former military personnel to seek assistance in dealing with their own unresolved trauma and loss. Gold Star families contacted military charities to share their stories and connect with others who had experienced similar losses. Catherine's personal experience following the ceremony was intense and transformative. The emotional weight of the stories she had heard and the connection she had made with military families left her deeply affected for days following the event. She described to close friends how the ceremony had changed her understanding of royal duty from ceremonial obligation to genuine service in support of those who had sacrificed for their country. The Queen Consort staff reported that she had requested detailed follow-up information about every family she had met during the ceremony, wanting to understand how she might continue supporting their needs beyond the single day's interaction. This request led to the establishment of a new royal initiative focused specifically on supporting military families dealing with loss and trauma, demonstrating how the ceremony's impact extended into ongoing practical assistance. The eternal flame itself became a powerful focal point for continued remembrance in the days following the ceremony. Thousands of people made pilgrimages to Westminster to stand quietly beside the flame, many leaving personal mementos, letters, and photographs of their own lost loved ones. The area around the cenotaph was transformed into an impromptu memorial where strangers shared stories and offered mutual support in their grief. Military units from across Britain and the Commonwealth sent delegations to maintain honor guard positions beside the eternal flame, throughout its 7-day burning period. The changing of the guard occurred every 4 hours, creating ongoing opportunities for public witness to military precision and dedication. Each unit brought their own regimental traditions to the honor guard duty, adding layers of military history and heritage to the continuing memorial. The international diplomatic impact of the ceremony was significant and unexpected. Ambassadors from allied nations reported that their governments had been deeply moved by the ceremony's authentic emotion and inclusive recognition of sacrifice from multiple countries. Several nations announced plans to model their own remembrance ceremonies on the inclusive, emotionally honest approach that Catherine had brought to this event. Educational institutions across Britain incorporated footage and account from the ceremony into their curriculum, using Catherine's example to teach students about the ongoing relevance of military sacrifice and the importance of remembering those who had died in service to their country. The ceremony became a touchstone for discussions about citizenship, service, and the responsibilities that come with freedom secured by other sacrifice. The ceremony's aftermath also included important conversations about mental health support for those affected by military service and loss. Catherine's visible emotion and authentic engagement with grieving families helped normalize discussions about grief, trauma, and the ongoing impact of military service on individuals and families. Mental health professionals noted increased willingness among veterans and military families to seek support in the weeks following the ceremony. Religious leaders from multiple faith traditions reported increased attendance at services in the days following the ceremony, as people sought spiritual comfort and community support in processing their own experiences of loss and remembrance. The interfaith elements of the ceremony had demonstrated how different religious traditions could unite in honoring sacrifice while maintaining their distinctive approaches to grief and memory. The economic impact of the ceremony extended beyond its immediate costs, as tourism to military museums, war memorials, and historical sites increased significantly in the following weeks. The ceremony had sparked broader public interest in military history and family genealogy, with many people beginning research into their own family's military service records. Catherine's personal correspondence in the weeks following the ceremony included hundreds of letters from military families around the world who had been touched by her obvious emotion and authentic engagement during the event. These letters often included family photographs, military service records, and personal stories that had never been shared publicly before. The ceremony had created a sense of permission for people to express their own grief and pride in ways they had never felt comfortable doing previously. The lasting impact of the ceremony was perhaps best measured in the ongoing changes it prompted in royal protocol and public expectations for ceremonial events. Catherine had demonstrated that authentic emotion and genuine human connection could enhance rather than diminish the dignity and effectiveness of state occasions, setting a new standard for royal engagement with serious national issues. 6 months after the ceremony, the ripple effects of that emotional November morning continued to transform how Britain and the Commonwealth approached military remembrance and royal service. Queen Consort Catherine had unknowingly initiated a fundamental shift in public expectations for ceremonial events, demonstrating that authentic emotion and genuine human connection could enhance rather than diminish the power of state occasions. The most immediate and tangible legacy came through the establishment of the Catherine Foundation for Military Families, a charitable organization that emerged directly from the Queen Consort's experiences during and after the ceremony. The Foundation's mission centered on providing long-term support for families dealing with military loss, going beyond traditional one-time assistance to offer ongoing counseling, educational support for military children, and practical help with daily life challenges that persisted long after initial grief support ended. The Foundation's first major initiative involved creating regional support centers across Britain where military families could access coordinated services ranging from grief counseling to career guidance for surviving spouses. Catherine insisted on visiting each center personally during its first year of operation, continuing the hands-on approach that had characterized her participation in the remembrance ceremony. These visits were not ceremonial occasions, but working meetings where she spent hours listening to family experiences and refining the Foundation's programs based on direct feedback from those it served. Sarah Mitchell, the young widow Catherine had met during her ceremony preparations, became the Foundation's first family liaison coordinator. Sarah's role involved connecting newly bereaved families with others who had experienced similar losses, creating networks of mutual support that extended far beyond formal counseling services. The program proved remarkably effective, with participating families reporting significantly better adjustment outcomes compared to those relying solely on traditional support services. The international impact of the ceremony manifested in unexpected ways as allied nations began incorporating similar elements of emotional authenticity and family involvement into their own remembrance traditions. The United States military establishment, traditionally focused on formal precision in ceremonial events, began experimenting with programs that encouraged more personal connection between military leadership and bereaved families. Canada established new protocols for Indigenous veteran recognition that drew inspiration from the inclusive approach Catherine had demonstrated. Educational initiatives inspired by the ceremony reached far beyond military history curricula. Schools across Britain began implementing programs that connected students directly with veterans and military families, moving beyond abstract historical study to personal encounters with living witnesses to service and sacrifice. Catherine personally supported several of these programs, often participating in classroom discussions where her own experiences during the ceremony served as a starting point for deeper conversations about citizenship, service, and personal responsibility. The ceremony's impact on mental health awareness and support proved particularly significant and lasting. The visible emotion Catherine had displayed during the event helped normalize discussions about grief, trauma, and the ongoing psychological costs of military service. Mental health professionals reported sustained increases in veterans and military families seeking support, with many specifically citing the ceremony as the moment they felt permission to address unresolved emotional issues. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the wounded veteran surgeon Catherine had met during the ceremony's aftermath, established a specialized treatment program for military healthcare providers dealing with moral injury and survivor guilt. The program's approach emphasized community support and shared experience rather than individual therapy alone, reflecting lessons learned from the collective grieving process witnessed during the ceremony. The eternal flame that had burned for 7 days following the ceremony became the inspiration for a permanent memorial garden established on the grounds of the Royal Hospital, Chelsea. The garden featured areas designed for quiet reflection, family gatherings, and small ceremonial events, providing a space where military families could find ongoing comfort and connection. Catherine worked closely with landscape designers to ensure the garden would serve practical emotional needs rather than simply creating an aesthetically pleasing monument. The memorial garden's design incorporated elements from Commonwealth countries and recent conflict zones, including stones from Normandy beaches, soil from Afghan battlefields, and plantings native to regions where British forces had served. Each element carried deep symbolic meaning while creating a living memorial that would change and grow over time, reflecting the ongoing nature of military service and sacrifice. Perhaps the most profound long-term change involved how the royal family approached their role in supporting those affected by military service. King Charles established new protocols requiring senior royals to undergo extensive preparation before participating in military-related ceremonies, ensuring they understood both historical context and contemporary realities faced by service members and their families. This preparation included direct engagement with currently serving personnel and recently bereaved families, moving beyond briefing papers to personal encounters that informed royal understanding and empathy. Catherine's own role evolved significantly in the months following the ceremony. She became the royal family's primary liaison with military charities and veteran organizations, a position that required far more than ceremonial appearances. Her schedule included regular working meetings with military leadership, policy discussions with government officials responsible for veteran affairs, and ongoing relationship building with international partners working on similar issues. The ceremony's influence extended into popular culture and public discourse about military service and remembrance. Television documentaries exploring the event's preparation and aftermath drew massive audiences, while books and articles analyzing its significance became bestsellers. The authentic emotion and genuine human connection demonstrated during the ceremony had captured public imagination in ways that traditional royal events rarely achieved. Social media platforms continued to feature content related to the ceremony months after its conclusion, with military families and veterans sharing their own stories inspired by the openness and vulnerability Catherine had displayed. The hashtag Remember Together became a rallying point for ongoing conversations about military sacrifice and community support, generating hundreds of thousands of posts sharing personal experiences and family histories. The ceremony's legacy also influenced how other nations approach their relationships with royal families and heads of state. Several Commonwealth countries modified their own ceremonial protocols to encourage more direct engagement between national leaders and citizens affected by military service. The model Catherine had established, thorough preparation, authentic emotion, and ongoing commitment, became a template for meaningful public service that extended far beyond military remembrance. Academic institutions began studying the ceremony as a case example of effective public leadership during moments of national significance. Business schools incorporated analysis of Catherine's preparation and execution into programs on crisis communication and authentic leadership, while political science departments examined how the ceremony had strengthened public trust in royal institutions through demonstrated competence and genuine care. The foundation Catherine established continued expanding its reach, eventually serving military families across the Commonwealth through partnerships with veteran organizations in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other allied nations. The international network allowed families to maintain connections even when military service required frequent relocations, creating a global community of mutual support that transcended national boundaries. One of the Foundation's most innovative programs involved connecting military children with mentors who had grown up in military families and successfully navigated the unique challenges of frequent moves, parental deployments, and the ever-present possibility of loss. These mentorship relationships provided practical guidance, while also honoring the experiences of military families in ways that traditional support programs often overlooked. The ceremony's influence on remembrance traditions continued evolving as veteran organizations incorporated lessons learned from its success into their own annual events. Local remembrance ceremonies began featuring more opportunities for personal sharing and family participation, moving beyond formal programs to include time for community members to share their own stories and connections to military service. Catherine's personal growth through the ceremony experience influenced her approach to all royal duties, not just those related to military affairs. Her preparation process became a model for thorough engagement that prioritized understanding and empathy over mere protocol compliance. Staff members noted significant changes in how she prepared for public engagements, always seeking to understand the human experiences behind formal occasions. The continuing legacy of the ceremony was perhaps best measured in the ongoing relationships Catherine maintained with families she had met during the event and its aftermath. Regular correspondence, private meetings, and informal check-ins became standard practice, creating lasting connections that extended far beyond single ceremonial encounters. These relationships provided ongoing education for Catherine, while offering sustained support for families dealing with the long-term impacts of military loss. As the first anniversary of the ceremony approached, planning began for a commemorative event that would honor both the original ceremony's success and the ongoing work it had inspired. However, Catherine insisted that any anniversary observance focus primarily on the continued needs of military families rather than celebrating the ceremony itself. This approach reflected the deeper understanding of service and sacrifice that the original ceremony had cultivated, ensuring that the legacy remained focused on practical support rather than ceremonial recognition. The transformation in public expectations for royal service that began with Catherine's emotional authenticity during the remembrance ceremony continued influencing how the monarchy engaged with serious national issues. Future ceremonial events incorporated lessons learned about the power of genuine human connection and thorough preparation, establishing new standards for meaningful public service that honored both tradition and contemporary needs. The ceremony had demonstrated that royal duty could be both dignified and deeply human, creating a template for authentic leadership that would influence generations of public service to come.